Good evening from ABC News headquarters in New York. I'm Howard K. Smith. Frank Reynolds is on.
If you know anything about student resistance to the Vietnam War, odds are this tragedy comes to mind first.
4 students killed at Kent State University in Ohio during a confrontation with the National Guard at a war protest rally.
The National Guard was throwing the tear gas at the students, and the students were throwing it back. And National Guard were marching up this hill. They turned around, got on their knees, and fired.
Nobody is exactly sure what prompted the action, but the National Guardsmen opened fire.
John Hambrick of Cleveland's ABC affiliate WEWS is describing the event that's as synonymous with the Vietnam War as napalm. It inspired a famous Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young song, was made into a TV movie adaptation in 1981.
The dramatic tale of a time America will never forget. Kent State.
And was remembered across the country in 2020 on the 50th anniversary. But as far as history remembers, student opposition to the Vietnam War ends at the Kent State shooting. However, that shooting on May 4th sparked a nationwide student strike on hundreds of college campuses across the United States. Many states, like California, closed down public university campuses as soon as student protest amplified. Don Oliver of CBS News.
Governor Reagan's order closing state schools was effective very quickly on most campuses.
But in the state of Ohio, despite Governor James Rhodes' plea for schools to shut down, it was up to the universities whether to close or not. And many, like the state's largest, Ohio State University in Columbus, tried to stay open and allow the students to voice their anger. Ohio State only lasted 3 days after the shooting before the National Guard was called in to close the campus. NBC anchor Chet Hutton.
At Ohio State University, students had until noon today to get off the campus. The university was closed because of fear that the violence of the last several days might lead to tragedy.
At Ohio University in Athens, there was more optimism than the students could protest without violence as the university became the last in the state to remain open in the spring of 1970. However, those protests would only become larger and angrier with each passing day. Assistant editor for the OU student newspaper in 1970, Tom Hodson vividly remembers.
Once Kent State hit, then all bets were off. And then it became the us versus them with the police. It was street warfare between the police and the rioters at that point.
The protests led to fire bombings and riots. At its worst, students threw rocks and pulled up bricks from the street, and police responded, coating uptown Athens with opaque clouds of tear gas. Then, at 3 a.m. on May 15th,
Ohio University in Athens was closed down today after 2 days of violence. National Guardsmen sealed off the campus.
There was an announcement, school was closed, and we had to go home.
I remember my reaction was just terrible sadness.
For activist Charles Patton, student newspaper editor Andrew Alexander, and the vast majority of Ohio University students, that is how the academic year ended, with National Guardsmen overlooking their hastily made plans to get out of the city in just 24 hours.
And of course you worry about your loved ones, your friends, and are they okay, and are they safe?
Except that wasn't the case for the university's baseball team, which was just about to compete for a chance to make the College World Series in Omaha, Nebraska, when they got the news during a road trip. Ace pitcher Ed Robbins and team captain Joe Carbone.
But, we had a great team, and we really felt it was our year to move forward. And we're sitting there saying, well, what's going to happen?
I mean, when school closed, that's it. It's done. Everything's over with, And that's when it hit me that, holy cow, I can't believe this. 1 year we got a chance to go to Omaha, and we're not going to be able to play the season.
What happened to this team after the university's closure has been completely overshadowed by the tragic events in the 51 years since that spring, but it's a story worth telling. The team had 12 of its members going to play professional baseball after graduation, including a future MLB All-Star and another arguably the greatest ever at his position, athletic trainer Larry Starr.
I honestly felt, and I think the team felt, that we were the best team there.
And being one of the best college baseball teams in the country was quite a feat for the historic university tucked away in a small town of Athens, Ohio, in the heart of Appalachia.
The General Assembly of Ohio on February 18, 1804, passed an act to establish a university in the town of Athens. Just 4 years later, Ohio University opened in a 2-room brick building with a single instructor and 3 students, claiming the distinction of being the first seat of higher learning in the
Ohio University was the most western public university in the United States when it was founded. It's so far southeast in the state that the Ohio River and West Virginia border are just a 30-minute drive away.
In applying to colleges, my guidance counselor suggested Ohio University. In looking at the school and looking where it was, kind of in the Appalachian region, and the school talked about, I remember, just connection to the community and so forth, and it seemed like it would be a good place to go.
That's Ken Light. He has published several photo books and is currently a photojournalism professor at UC Berkeley. During the 1969 to 1970 school year, he's a freshman. And he's right, the connection between the university and the city is so tight that it's hard to determine where one begins and the other ends. In sports at OU, women's collegiate sports were just getting started in 1970, so the three biggest men's sports, football, basketball, and baseball, dominated. The football team was led by Bill Hess, one of the most successful coaches in program history, and the basketball team routinely made NCAA tournament appearances. That meant that even when the baseball team won the Mid-America Conference title 3 years in a row up to 1970, they were still more of an afterthought.
They had great tight end or flanker, Todd Snyder, and they had two other very good players that played pro.
That's Bill Choate talking about the football team. He was a reporter for OU's campus newspaper, The Post.
The baseball team was always successful, but it was a little like the distant cousin that you know is doing well, but you don't really pay attention to the press clippings.
But incoming freshmen who wanted to play baseball still flocked to OU. That was mainly because of the reputation of head coach Bob Wren, who was regarded as one of the best college coaches working at that time.
My next-door neighbor's father came over to my father, and he was going to send his son to the Ted Kluszewski baseball camp in Bainbridge, Ohio, which is near Chillicothe.
That's Joe Carbone.
And so I mowed lawns and made enough money to go to the camp. And when we got there, there were batting cages and like 6 baseball fields, and we had never seen batting cages before. We didn't even know what they were. The first day of the camp, Coach Wren was there from Ohio University, and 2 coaches from East Carolina University. They kind of ran the camp. Well, Coach Wren took a liking to me, I guess. You know, once I left, Coach Wren said, look, I'm going to stay in touch with you. And then that spring, my guidance counselor came in and said, hey, this guy's calling from Ohio University. He wants your grades. And we sent him to him, and he wants you to come visit. And so I went down, watched Ohio University play Miami, and they had some great players. So we got done. It's time for me to go home, catch the bus again. Coach Wren said, well, what do you think? I can give you this much money on a scholarship. So what do you think about coming here? And I was just, I'm a little guy, and all these guys look so big to me. I said, Coach, I don't know. I don't know if I'm good enough to come play here. And he said, I'll be the judge of that. He says, I think you are, but you have to earn the right to play.
Joe Carbone did earn the right to play on the Ohio University Bobcats. He became their leadoff batter and second baseman, and he would eventually become the team captain for the 1970 baseball season. Along with being a liaison between Coach Wren and the team, Carbone would also mentor freshman players who made the team. In 1970, one of those was Steve Swisher from nearby Parkersburg, West Virginia. He was going to be tasked with something he had never done in baseball before as Wren built his championship team.
Toward the end of fall ball, Coach Wren said, when are you going home? And I said, well, I'm going home tonight. He said, well, ask your parents what they would think of you as a catcher. And I'm going, what?
Swisher had always played at the shortstop position and assumed Wren would move the original starting shortstop to third base. The only problem, the original starting shortstop was Mike Schmidt, named the best shortstop in OU's conference, so he wasn't moving. Swisher hadn't played catcher once in his entire life playing baseball, and he was going to make sure Coach Wren knew he wouldn't start then.
So when I went back to school on Monday, I had the greatest speech in the world to tell Coach Wren why I didn't want to catch.
Swisher even planned the route he would take to get to Wren's office, entering the building through the back doors instead of the front door so he would catch the coach in his office.
I went in the back doors and came down the hallway. Well, I get about a third of the way, and I hear these doors close, and I look up at Jim. So I got this great speech, and we get face to face, and he goes, Swish, your catching gear is in the locker room, and you need to be upstairs or Grover Center in a half hour. We're going to start your catching drills. Turned around and walked away.
That was the end of the debate. It would work out for him and the team not only in 1970, but also in 1973. Swisher would be drafted in the first round as an MLB catcher for the Chicago White Sox. He'd even make the 1976 MLB All-Star Game as a member of the Chicago Cubs. He spent 9 seasons in the majors, all of them as a catcher.
From the Chicago Cubs, catcher Steve Swisher.
The Bobcats baseball team had 2 main goals for the season. First was to make it to the College World Series, something that was continuously out of their grasp. Just the previous season, they made it to the qualifying regional tournament, but lost. The other goal was more personal, to get Coach Bob Wren to 400 career wins in his 21-year career as a coach. Ed Robbins, the ace pitcher.
The number one reason I went to OU, just me personally, is because of Coach Wren. I felt he was one of the best baseball coaches in the nation.
He's one of the greatest fundamentalists I've ever been around.
Mike Schmidt, the Hall of Famer, said Coach Wren was second only to his own father as most influential to his development as a baseball player. It was that important to the players and anyone connected to Coach Wren to get the wins.
When that team went on the road, sometimes I would go with them covering it for the Post.
This is Mark Rosenwig, the sports editor for the Post at the time.
And Bob Wren invited me to sit in the dugout. And it was fascinating because he was a tremendous teacher. He would say, okay, it's 1 and 2. Are we running? Are we sacrificing? What are we doing? He was quizzing the players, talking about situations. So it actually changed my knowledge and approach to baseball. It's not, just go up there and see if you can hit the curveball. There was a lot more to it.
Before the season even started, Joe Carbone was selected as the student captain for the team.
They would always have an athletic banquet where all the teams would go. They would announce the team captains for the next year. So our team voted me captain. Coach Wren called me in the office and he says, okay, Joseph. He called me Joseph. Only 2 people call me Joseph, my mother and Coach Wren. He said, from now I'm calling you captain. So I want everyone to know that I know your position. He said, and he told the team, he says, you captain, you got anything you want to complain about, you go see your captain.
In the first month of play in the 1970 season, the Bobcats won 14 out of 16 games by scores up to 13-0. The most impressive player on the team by that point was ace pitcher Ed Robbins. He was the starting pitcher in half of those 16 games and won all but one, which was a no decision. With 14 strikeouts, he was averaging almost a strikeout an inning. In one game against rival Miami University of Ohio, he struck out 13 batters. It was pitching dominance never seen before at Ohio University.
I threw mainly fastballs and curveballs, and in my senior year I developed a slider that I threw quite a bit. And we tried most of the time just to keep throwing strikes. I didn't worry as much about location. There wasn't the emphasis back then on location and change-ups and changing speeds and throwing to spots that there is today. So a lot of my philosophy in 1970 was when I threw a fastball, over 90% of the time I was trying to do maximum velocity.
In short, Robbins was completely overpowering opposing hitters. He didn't need much of anything else. On a rain-soaked April weekend came the real test for Robbins and these winning Bobcats. The Western Michigan Broncos were the only other competitive baseball team in the Mid-America Conference. The Bobcats faced what the student newspaper, The Post, called their version of the World Series. Both teams were undefeated in conference play. If the Broncos won at least 2 of the 3 games in this series, they would ruin the Bobcats' chances of making it to the College World Series. In the first game, Robbins allowed 1 run and 4 hits, giving the batters a chance to take the game 3-1. In the dramatic second game, the Bobcats were down 5-4 but had runners on second and third base with 1 out. Then Bob Kleber, a freshman outfielder who was only playing because of a freak injury during practice that took out the starting outfielder, smashed a double to center field. The Bobcats took the lead 6-5 and never looked back, winning the game 7-5. The Broncos won the third game, but it didn't matter. The Bobcats were essentially guaranteed to win the Mid-America Conference. The Bobcats kept cruising after that, winning 6 of their next 7 games. Coach Wren got his 400th career win during a game against the rival Marshall Thundering Herd on May 8th in an 18-3 rout. Just 4 days later, Ed Robbins would win his 11th straight game, breaking the university record for most consecutive pitching wins. Mark Rosenwig put it simply,
"There's never been a team like it since."
The Bobcats had a record of 22 wins and 4 losses, with only 6 games left until NCAA tournament play. But suddenly, all of that success would be overshadowed, and might even be for nothing. A culture war was about to break out at Ohio University, and it would put their season in jeopardy. Ohio University was not really known as a progressive campus during its first 160 years. But in the 1960s, OU students joined college students across the country organizing for women and minority rights and student independence.
What do we want now? Freedom! 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 Oh, freedom! Freedom!
When Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968, black students led a sit-in protest that blocked the busiest intersection in Athens. In 1969, hundreds of women students defied the curfew and stayed out long into the night, protesting strict rules for female students. That same month, black students successfully petitioned the university to set aside $250,000 to create a Black Studies Institute.
When I learned about the inequalities in the educational school system, it kind of reinforced some need to have some equality for some people coming up behind me.
That's Charles Patton, one of the black student activists who fought for the Black Studies Institute. Originally a journalism major, the civil rights movement convinced him to study the history of African Americans.
It wasn't hard to go and protest about learning some history that was not offered in high school, nor was it offered on the campus. I had never heard of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. Did not know that any black people fought in the Civil War. Twisted history that I discovered. Wanted to find out the truth.
Patton was one of many activists at Ohio University leading the fight for rights in all kinds of ways and winning. That might be what led Athens, Ohio, a rural city tucked away in the Appalachian Mountains, to become a regional countercultural hub.
There was this cultural shift coming about.
Ken Light, a freshman in the 1969 to 1970 academic year, released a photo book in 2015. What's Going On, in part, highlights the disconnect between the incoming activism-centered, drug-friendly student population and many Athens residents who are still back in the 1950s.
There, in my dorm, my freshman year, there were kids who were in the band, right? And they were from Ohio, they were fairly conservative, and they started smoking marijuana. It was just everywhere. Just look at all the music, all the different type of music that came in and played, and then there were all these local bars that had these amazing groups that became, internationally renowned, but they were playing in some of these small bars. So there was a huge shift that was happening, not only from, I would say, activists.
Not surprisingly, this was a shock to those Athens residents who called the town their home for life, not just 4 years.
It was clear that there was what they always called the town and gown issue, that there was a love-hate relationship between the town and the students, that the town needed the students and the town needed the university, and they kind of tolerated them. But my sense that it was a very conservative town. Police Chief Captain Corcoran disliked students, and the Judge Sheeter, disliked students. We tolerated, although very quickly they didn't tolerate it.
Students from this time say Athens Police Captain Charles Cochran and Athens Municipal Court Judge Franklin Sheeter governed the city as if it were any other rural conservative town in 1970, with heavy fines, jail sentences, and regular brute force. Here's Tom Hodson, associate editor for OU student newspaper The Post in the 1969-70 school year.
They were sort of like the dynamic duo. Captain Cochran knock you over the head and bring you into court, and then Sheeter would sentence you and put you away.
Charles Cochran died in 2009, but he did talk to documentarian Mark Leff about his policing tactics in the 2005 documentary The Sky Has Fallen. Here's Cochran describing how he ambushed a student protester.
I pulled up. I didn't say anything to him, but I said to Ted Jones, which followed me as chief, I said, "Have you got a rope in your car?" And Jesse says, "You're not going to hang me, are you?" I never said anything. Ted said, "No, I don't have any rope." I said, "You got any cement block?" "Oh, you ain't going to put me in Dye Lake." I never said anything to him. So finally, and the service director was with me. So we went down about 4 a.m. We locked him up.
It would be inevitable that the conflict between the students and the political powers of Athens, Ohio would clash. If there was any hope that town and gown would get along, it would have to come from Ohio University's administration. All hopes were high for one man, new university president Claude Soule.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Open Line, the radio program that puts you in touch with the president of Ohio University, Dr. Claude Soule. Dr. Soule, welcome to the show.
Good evening, Bob. Well, I think you have to remember, first of all, that the people of the state of Ohio, the taxpayers, invest approximately $20 million to $25 million a year in the operation of the university.
More than any other social issue, the Vietnam War was foremost on many students' minds. Being enrolled in college was the best protection students had against being drafted into the war, and even that wasn't a sure guarantee. The student deferments were a key reason students like Charles Patton enrolled in the first place.
I remember that I had no desire to go to Vietnam. I had a couple of friends who had gone there and gotten killed.
The threat of being drafted and seeing other Americans their age getting killed on foreign shores added urgency to student protest. In October 1969, the Post reported about 700 people in Athens joined a national call for an end to the war. It was followed up by a march on Washington, D.C. the next month, which Post contributing editor Rudy Maxa covered for the student newspaper.
I went back to Washington often, and I went back to cover a lot of the anti-war protests. You know, downtown D.C., on the Washington Monument grounds or along the reflecting pools, there were cops in total battle gear on huge horses. And I had been tear gassed several times in D.C.
It wouldn't be long before student voices were too loud to ignore. Like other student activist groups across the nation, OU activists focused on getting the Army Reserve Officers Training Corps, or ROTC program, off campus. They felt the organization was a symbol of the U.S. military in Vietnam.
Good evening, my fellow Americans.
On April 30th, it would get worse.
To protect our men who are in Vietnam and to guarantee the continued success of our withdrawal and Vietnamization programs, I have concluded that the time has come for action.
On April 30th, President Richard Nixon announced that he would send U.S. troops into Cambodia, a neutral nation, which many saw as an expansion of a war. That's when students started to occupy the College Green daily, making it a home for teach-in protest. In Northeast Ohio at Kent State University, student activists firebombed the campus ROTC building on the night of May 2nd. An enraged Governor Rhodes ordered in the National Guard. For 2 days, Kent State protesters and the National Guard clashed. The air was filled with tear gas and hurled rocks.
This area immediately! Leave this area immediately!
On the afternoon of May 4th, it seemed the protesters gained ground when a group of guardsmen retreated back up a hill away from the protesters. But they turned around, got on one knee, and... The Guard fired 67 rounds of live ammunition into the crowd of unarmed protesters. 4 students killed, 9 injured. Andrew Alexander, editor-in-chief of the Post.
Someone, I think it may have been Hudson, came running across from the old Baker Center with a piece of paper, which was a wire story, that said 4 students had been shot by National Guardsmen at Kent State. And I remember saying at that moment, we're going to have a hell of a time trying to keep this campus quiet.
Chet Hutley, NBC News.
The best figure we can get is that about 429 colleges across the country are closed entirely, on strike, or having some kind of organized protest. The vast majority of them are peaceful. It is the biggest and most widespread expression of campus displeasure this country has ever seen.
Governor James Rhodes, a Nixon-aligned Republican, was still under the impression that the students caused the Kent State shootings. So, he pressed public universities to close and liberally use the Ohio National Guard at universities that didn't. By May 7th, Ohio University was among the few public universities in the state still open. Governor Rhodes pressured President Claude Soule to close OU, but Soule refused. He believed that the university could remain open, debating the war in an academic environment. Andrew Alexander, editor-in-chief of the Post.
There was a major student gathering in Grover Center. At that time, it was the basketball arena. And you'll see a picture of this, and it's Claude going down there, and there must have been 2,000 students, and a lot of them just angry at everything, angry at the university. And by God, he went down and spoke to them.
Ken Light, the student activist photographer.
For a couple of days, I want to say 2 or 3 days, the administration let protesters, demonstrators, be on the campus green and have a microphone and sound system, and every day people would come out. And then at a certain point, they got tired of it, and they just decided, okay, we're going to just cut this off. And that's when it all exploded.
In the early morning of May 8th, the ROTC supply room underneath the football stadium was firebombed, causing more than $4,000 worth of damage. But despite that, the administration thought the demonstrations might be coming to an end. Howard K. Smith, the ABC News anchorman, was interested in the case of Ohio University and invited President Soule onto a televised panel discussion about university unrest.
At the same time, I remain confident with what I have seen at Ohio University over the last 5 days that we can remain open. In fact, I said to the university community today that this may really be Ohio University's finest hour, and I hope we can persevere.
But days later, an unknown arsonist firebombed the Nelson Commons building in the southern part of the campus. The building was still under construction and therefore unoccupied, but the damage reached into 6 figures. Lasting peace was a dim hope, and the university changed tactics. On the morning of May 13th, President Soule suspended 7 students he claimed were behind the violence in the recent protest. The university started working with Athens police and some press photographers to spy and intimidate other known student activists, including Ken Light.
There was a protest in front of the draft board, and a car pulled up, and the door opened, and they motioned me into the car. And in the car was Captain Cochran and the head of the FBI office, and I think it was the sheriff, and they kind of drove me around town, and, we're watching you, blah, 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 and then they dropped me off back in front of the draft board.
It was dangerous to be outside on OU's campus, as small groups of protesters were now using anything to throw at the police. The rioters even started digging out the bricks that made up the streets and threw them at police cars and crowds. Andrew Alexander.
In a few days before the school actually closed, when there were constant nightly violent protests, I remember a story I wrote. It basically said the university was remaining open, but the headline said the university is open, but barely. Absolutely accurate.
Another school closing down today was Ohio University in Athens. Authorities acted after persisting student disorders.
On Friday, May 15th at 3 o'clock in the morning, President Claude Soule sent out a press release saying the school would be closing and that the campus would need to be completely vacated in 24 hours. The release said that the Ohio National Guard, just 2 weeks after the Kent State shooting, would be coming to escort students off campus.
Well, we tried hard, but we had to try in a responsible way, and it had always been my feeling that if we ran to a point where lives were endangered, that we would have to close. It was my feeling after 2 nights of frenzied activity, rioting I think is by no means too strong a word, that the danger to life was increasing hour by hour. Moreover, we felt there was no point in staying open if we could not maintain an academic atmosphere. I think we clearly lost that last night.
I remember my reaction was just terrible sadness.
Andrew Alexander.
First of all, we had failed at keeping the university open and nonviolent. But the other emotion I recall was just terrible sadness that it was over for the Post. There were a lot of tears there because this is, again, pre-internet, pre-cell phone. People were trading pieces of paper. Here's my parents' address. Here's our home landline number, things like this. And we just sort of suddenly realized this is it. There's no paper tomorrow. There's nothing to report.
The 1970 Ohio University yearbook ends with 2 photos. One is of National Guardsmen marching down Court Street. The other is of an empty classroom. The Bobcats baseball team wasn't there for any of that. They got the news of their school's closing while at Bowling Green State University for a road game series. Joe Carbone, the team captain.
When we left campus on Thursday, we were waving to everybody from the bus. Buses didn't have air conditioning back then. You know, you open the windows to get some air. So we would roll the windows down and yell at the students who were driving through town, saying goodbye, and, you know, guys we knew and girls we knew and everything. Then we got to Bowling Green, and we played and beat them the first game. And then the next morning, Lynn Burke, our manager, was knocking on our door and says, Coach Ryan wants to see everybody downstairs right now in the lobby. So we went down, and TV was on. It was news, and Ohio University got closed the night before because of riots. Then it was declared martial law. You know, you had to be off campus, so there was nobody there.
The team still played a doubleheader on May 16th against the Bowling Green Falcons and won both games. But after that, it was back to Athens, and no one knew what that meant. Ed Robbins, the ace pitcher.
And of course, you worry about your loved ones, you know, your friends, and are they okay, and are they safe?
The National Guard was there with a Jeep there, and the colonel came on the bus and told Coach Wren, he says, Coach, you and your boys have 2 hours to go get your stuff and get out of town. So we drove through town, and there was like nobody on the street. It was really eerie, and there were National Guard troops, like at every parking meter along the street.
Steve Swisher, the freshman catcher.
And they took us in Jeeps, depending where we were staying. Everybody was out of there. They got all the people out, all the students and everything out of there.
We drove the bus outside of town, and Coach Wren got us all out, said, everybody go stay somewhere outside of town for 2 days, and then call my house, and I'll tell you what we're doing.
While people who lived nearby, like Steve Swisher, stayed with their parents, many of the athletes had to leave town and go back to their parents' houses. Some even stayed on the couches of their teammates. The Bobcats had one more road series versus the Toledo Rockets before the NCAA regional tournament in Columbus. Coach Wren would do his best to make sure that the season would continue, despite not having any access to their training fields, but there were no guarantees.
But, you know, we had a great team, and we really felt it was our year to move forward.
Ed Robbins.
And we're sitting there saying, well, what's going to happen? I don't know if there was a day or 2 days or 3 days, I don't know what the elapsed time was, where all of us were wondering, are we done? Is this it for our college careers? Are we done? Are we not going to see each other anymore? I mean, it's like any unfinished business, right? The drive to finish something that you started is strong, and now something has intervened, and all the hard work and everything else that we put into this, is it all for nothing this year?
Two days later, Joe Carbone calls Coach Wren.
He says, you all have to bring sheets and a pillow and your overnight stuff, and you're going to meet at the Ted Kluszewski Baseball School in Bainbridge, Ohio. Everybody just go there and meet me there.
Coach Wren used his position as the assistant athletic director at Ohio University to keep the season going, since the rest of the games took place outside of Athens. But there was a catch. The team couldn't practice in Athens, so Wren arranged a stay at a youth sports camp in Bainbridge, a rural town 80 miles west of Athens. The camp hadn't yet opened for the season.
And we got there, and there were buckets and brooms, so we had to clean the place up, and there were like dead birds and dead mice and dead rats in this building, and we cleaned it all up.
Larry Starr, the team's graduate athletic trainer, also traveled with the team to the Ted Kluszewski baseball camp.
In the barracks, it was just a very low key barracks that had cots that we slept in. And then we had to eat at the only one restaurant downtown. We took over that restaurant for that week. We didn't have any ground crew people there that I know of. I don't remember a big crew coming in and, mowing or anything.
Hall of Famer Mike Schmidt wrote about the experience.
We held practice on a Little League field and slept in barracks made for 12-year-old kids. Enough said, as you can imagine what a riot we had.
Having to live in a snake-infested children's baseball camp for a week was too much of an adjustment for some, but Coach Wren had the players stick to it. Captain Joe Carbone.
Mike Schmidt went to sleep in his bed. He went out to his car because he was, he just didn't want to sleep in the barracks. So Dick England, our assistant coach, comes to me and he said, your shortstop is out in his car in the parking lot. Go tell him to get in here and get in his bed or he doesn't play tomorrow. So I went out and I said, Schmitty, you got to come in. He said, I'm not going in there. I said, you got to come in or you're not going to play. I said, just go in. It's no big deal. I said, we took care of all the mice and the rats and everything. Don't worry about it.
In conversations, Mike Schmidt couldn't remember if this happened, but he did remember one silver lining to the whole situation. Because of the school's closing, the grades were what they were on May 15th, and a pass-fail option was included. Joe Carbone.
So you had three choices. Take the grade you had then. If you were passing, take a pass-fail, or finish your work and get a grade. Well, hell, no one wanted to finish their work.
Despite the 85-mile move to a children's baseball camp, the Bobcats ended up sweeping the Toledo Rockets in the 3-game series. They ended the regular season with 28 wins and just 4 losses, a record that was more than good enough to win the conference title. The NCAA regional tournament would take place in 11 days, so the team finally had some free time. That's when Coach Wren came up with an idea to honor his ace pitcher, Ed Robbins.
Coach Wren set up some type of inter-squad game in Hillsboro, which is where I'm from. So we're getting ready to go to Columbus to play in the regionals, and so we do this inter-squad game, and so I am pitching against our first team hitters, right? So I'm pitching against Joe and Schmidt and all this other stuff. I made a comment to Coach Wren, and I said, well, you do want me to do 100% or do you want me not to? How, sort of a conditioning thing. And well, Joe heard that, and he felt I was being disrespectful to the batters. And so they just lit me up like a Christmas tree.
Ed Robbins, who had not lost a single game that season, was getting played like he had just stood on the pitcher's mound for the first time. The first team hitters were getting doubles and home runs off him constantly in front of his home crowd.
Well, we just knocked the hell out of Ed in his 2 innings out there. And then when he came back in the dugout, and we said, hey, why didn't you throw hard to try to really get us out? Why didn't you throw hard?
Yeah, every time I see Carbone, he reminds me.
The first game in the NCAA regional tournament in Columbus took place on June 4th, and for the 3rd year in a row, it seemed like the Minnesota Golden Gophers would prevent the Bobcats from reaching the College World Series. Ed Robbins.
I had a bad game against Minnesota in the regional, and I gave up a run, and I thought we'd lost the game. I thought I blew it. For all my wins and everything else, I thought I'd blown that game.
In the bottom of the 9th inning, with Robbins hoping to keep Ohio's 2-run lead, he gave up a 2-run homer. The game stayed tied, Robbins was pulled out of the game, and anything could have happened.
Until the 10th inning. We went to extra innings, and Tommy Smith hit a home run. And that home run is what put us in the College World Series.
Tom Smith, the left fielder for the Bobcats, saved the game and Robbins' perfect record. Whenever Robbins talks about the team, he makes sure to bring up Tom Smith. The rest of the regional tournament was much easier. The Bobcats faced the Southern Illinois Salukis twice afterwards and beat them by scores of 7-zip and 8-5.
I guess I'm a loss of words to explain how it felt. It's just like this is the World Series of college baseball, and we're going to get a chance to play in it. What a phenomenal way for us seniors to end our career. What an honor for the hard work that Coach Wren has put into the baseball program for I don't know how many years ago. You know, and he would go to the College World Series, and he would be there as a member of different committees and groups, but he was never there with his team. And now he's there with his team.
By winning the tournament, the Associated Press ranked the Bobcats baseball team 4th in the nation, the highest any Ohio Bobcat sports team has placed in the national rankings before or since. But more importantly, they were making the College World Series for the first time in school history. And many players thanked their time at the Ted Kluszewski baseball camp, despite the dead rats, the snakes, and the cots made for children. Steve Swisher, the freshman catcher.
There was more of a closeness on his team because it was just us.
Larry Starr, the athletic trainer.
I still feel was one of the reasons we went on to the College World Series is that situation created a great bond with that team. That team was close anyhow. But the situation with Ted Kluszewski camp, I really feel, was a great situation for us. You would think it'd be horrible not being on campus and so forth. But it gave us the opportunity to focus on the team and also to bond and get to know each other because we were together 24/7, right?
The Bobcats upgraded from a sweltering team bus to a commercial airline and headed to Omaha, Nebraska for the College World Series.
Man, I'm blessed. You know, here we are in Omaha. My God, this is the top of the mountain.
Nearly everyone is ecstatic, except Larry Starr.
You know, we win the regional. Now we're allowed to go back home, go back to the university to get some stuff before we go to Omaha. Well, I had a personal situation that arose. When we were playing in the regional, Bob Wren called my room and asked me, he said, can I come down and talk to you? And I'm going, well, I don't know what that's about, you know. Well, it turned out my stepfather had passed away, had a sudden heart attack. He was 50 years old. And, you know, and I thank the Lord that he's the guy that told me. Because, it almost made it easier to hear it from him. And because I love my stepdad. We were very close. But, so it's kind of ironic that I have the celebration of going to the College World Series, and then there's an asterisk to it.
It was also looking like it might be a short appearance in the College World Series. Despite being ranked the 4th best team in the nation, the Bobcats would have to face the number 1 team in the nation, the Southern California Trojans, in their first game on June 12th. The Trojans had already won the College World Series 5 times in the past, including 3 times in the previous decade. But this far in, on a national stage, the team felt nothing could stop them now.
You get nervous before every game.
Ed Robbins would be the starting pitcher that game.
I don't care if you're a musician or an athlete or making a presentation in business. If you don't get nervous before you perform, then you're probably not 100% in it. And I think part of what helped us all as a team was we had this quiet confidence that we could compete. And all of us knew we had to do our job. So when I took the mound, we knew USC, we knew the top players.
Those top players included Dave Kingman, a future 3-time MLB All-Star, and Jim Barr, a pitcher who is now a member of the San Francisco Giants Wall of Fame. 3 other players on that team would eventually play in the major leagues. Steve Swisher.
We had respect for everybody we played against, but they weren't going to be intimidated.
The game between the Bobcats and the Trojans brought in more than 5,000 spectators. The Bobcats were used to numbers in the hundreds.
I know walking out, warming up in the bullpen, and then walking out to that mound is just a mind-blowing experience.
The first half of the game was a complete pitcher's duel between Robbins and Barr. Through the first 6 innings of play, the pitchers only allowed 6 hits combined. The game was tied at 1 run apiece at the top of the 7th inning. Then, the Bobcats broke out. Robbins, who entered the game with a season batting average of .289, an incredible feat for a pitcher, knocked in the go-ahead run with a single. The next inning, Malcolm Smoot, the starting catcher, drove in 2 runs with a single. It was all they needed. The Bobcats beat the best team in the country, 4-1.
I don't think any of us slept.
Mike Schmidt noted that during the frenzy of celebrating their opening night win, as the team was heading towards their bus, they were approached by kids asking for their autographs. According to Schmidt, they were just trying to get autographs of whoever they could. That night, he signed his first ever autograph, the one, he says, that would foreshadow the millions he would later sign during his Hall of Fame career. The Bobcats faced the Texas Longhorns 2 days later, and their pitching could not hold up. They went down 7-2 to the Longhorns. But the College World Series is a double elimination tournament, so they still had a chance to win through the losers bracket. But something even more noteworthy happened that game. Steve Swisher.
Coach Wren had myself and a right-handed pitcher named Terry Winger. He would pitch and I would catch the ninth inning, and we were the first freshman battery in the history of the College World Series at Omaha.
Freshmen were just recently allowed to be on the varsity baseball teams the previous year, so this was one of the first opportunities for something like this to happen.
It was a great honor. I mean, that's a great trivia question.
The next day, June 15th, the Bobcats kept their College World Series hopes alive, defeating the Iowa State Cyclones by a score of 9-6. 6 batters drove at least 1 run in that game. After that, with 4 teams left out of the 8 that arrived, the bracket was reorganized. They would face the Florida State Seminoles in the semifinals the next day instead of a rematch with the Southern California Trojans. Ed Robbins pitched a full game and allowed only 1 earned run, but the Bobcats left 7 runners on base, an issue that plagued them the entire season. They couldn't find a way to score a single run, but the Seminoles rounded the bases twice. It was Robbins' sole loss of the entire 1970 season, giving him a record of 14-1. Joe Carbone.
We weren't just happy to be there. You know, like, okay, we were there, now let's win. We can play with these guys. When we lost, we were really ticked. We were really pissed because we just felt, we should have played better, but we played pretty well. No one talked after the game. We got on the bus. Nobody talked on the bus. We got on the plane. Nobody talked on the plane. We got to the airport, and we really hardly said goodbye to anybody. It was just kind of surreal, that okay, we lost the national champ. We should have been national champions, and we didn't get it done.
The seniors weren't going to see each other as teammates again, but the team members that stuck around were not going to get a homecoming celebration either. Ohio University had not opened for the summer semester yet, so the campus was still deserted. Any mention of the team's appearance in the College World Series would just be a footnote in season previews for the 1971 season. They were one of the best sports teams Ohio University ever produced, and possibly one of the best college baseball teams ever, and they were almost immediately forgotten. The 1970 Ohio Bobcats baseball team finished the season with 33 wins and 6 losses. 37 team records were broken, either by an individual player or as a team. Mike Schmidt made the All-American first team as a shortstop, making him the best shortstop in college baseball. He tied the school record for home runs in a season with 10. Ed Robbins, with his 14-1 record, earned second-team All-American, as did starting first baseman Mike Hanna, who, despite getting injured partway through the season, hit a .422 batting average to lead the team. And after college, Mike Schmidt's story is well documented. He was drafted in the second round of the 1970 MLB draft and played for the Philadelphia Phillies from 1972 to 1989. In that 18-year span, he was a 3-time MVP, a 12-time All-Star, a 10-time Golden Glove Award winner, a 1980 World Series champion, and a member of the prestigious 500 Club. Players who have hit 500 or more home runs during their career. He was inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame in 1995. Steve Swisher, the freshman shortstop turned catcher, graduated in 1973 and was drafted in the first round by the Chicago White Sox. He spent 9 years in the MLB, playing for the Chicago Cubs, the St. Louis Cardinals, and the San Diego Padres. He made the 1976 National League All-Star team, joining former teammate Mike Schmidt that year. Steve's son, Nick Swisher, is also an MLB All-Star. Larry Starr, the graduate athletic trainer, went on to be head athletic trainer for the Cincinnati Reds in 1971, where he helped the team win 3 World Series championships in his 21 years there. He left Major League Baseball in 2001 and now does injury spotting for the National Football League and is the athletic trainer at an elite athletic high school. Fun fact, he's golfed with former President George H.W. Bush and legendary college basketball coach Bobby Knight. Ed Robbins was drafted in the 21st round of the 1970 MLB draft by the Pittsburgh Pirates and spent 3 years playing pro ball before retiring as a minor leaguer. He later became the president of his own marketing firm, just recently retiring in 2020. And Joe Carbone, the team captain, was drafted in the 24th round of the 1971 MLB draft by the Kansas City Royals, but only lasted 1 season before ending his time as a player. He didn't stop his involvement in baseball, though. In 1989, he became the head coach for the team he once captained. Carbone smashed Coach Wren's record, winning 689 games as head coach in 24 seasons and a place in the American Baseball Coaches Association Hall of Fame. Bob Wren retired in 1972, and 8 years later was inducted into the Coaches Hall of Fame. When a new baseball field at OU was completed in 1998, he was there to see it dedicated in his name. The Bob Wren Stadium in Athens has a statue of the legendary coach on the grounds. He died in 2002 at the age of 81. That 1970 team produced 12 players who would play professional baseball in some capacity. But outside of individual recognition for some of them, and Bob Wren, the story of one of the greatest college sports teams of all time has, reasonably, been buried under everything else that happened in the spring of 1970.
When the riots came, schools closed, everything was closed. Sports information was closed. We just went, and we were lucky that Coach Wren talked them into playing, and we went and played, and I don't think anybody at the university or in Athens, Ohio knew what we were even doing out in Omaha, or even knew we were there. We were kind of like the forgotten team, quite honestly. And, and the team's never been recognized.
But in 2020, the 50th anniversary of the team's run to the College World Series, the Ohio University Athletic Hall of Fame announced that the entire 1970 team, not just the players that made it to the majors, would be inducted into the university's Hall of Fame. Ed Robbins.
I'm excited that this team is going to be recognized and put in the Hall of Fame. It is an accomplishment that I'm not sure can be repeated. I certainly hope so. I would love to see OU back in the College World Series. I'd make a trip to Omaha to watch it, but it's hard for a team in the Midwest to do it. It's just difficult to get as far as we did.
Joe Carbone.
The other guys, this was a big deal in their life playing on this team. For all these other guys, even the guys that didn't play, they're just thrilled to death. And most of the guys are going, hey, we've never been recognized. And most of us haven't even seen each other.
A 50th anniversary reunion was planned for the spring of 2020, but was ultimately canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But the 1970 Bobcats baseball team knows how to wait patiently for when that reunion eventually happens. They've already succeeded while playing inside a powder keg.
Playing Within a Powder Keg is produced, written, and directed by me, Austin Linfante, in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree Master of Science in Journalism. A link to music and sound bites used, along with a script, has been attached to this page. Narration is done by Marianne Linfante. Special thanks to Mary Rogas, Michael Sweeney, Tom Hodson, Bill Reeder, Marilyn Greenwald, and Amy Edmondson for all their support over the past 2.5 years. Playing Within a Powder Keg is dedicated to Bob Wren, Mike Hanna, and Bill Toadvine, who all died with their stories untold.